Good morning, everyone. Aloha. Can you believe it's the end of April 2025? Wow. Welcome to the Neutral Zone. I'm your host, Jason Schwartz. This is KAKU 88.5 FM, the voice of Maui, simulcast on Akaku, Maui Community Media, channel 55. You can go up to YouTube and look at Pound Dream Maui #1. You'll find a lot of shows on MauiNeutralZone.com. But you heard me talk. You on the radio don't know. I'm sitting here with a beautiful young woman who I would say to myself was more a model. But after I heard and got her, there was a guest on our show just a couple of weeks ago named John. And John was talking to me, and I thought, boy, I haven't talked to him about his music, and I bet he knows other people that would be important to interview. And the first name he came up with was Alisha Shanti. Alisha Shanti Chauhan, is that right? Chauhan.
Yes.
Welcome to our show. If I would have want to introduce you, I would have said, this is a woman who is into water. And there on the west side, when I spoke to John, he just said that you were absolutely dedicated and committed as an environmentalist to making a change with water. And I didn't really know where it was going to go. But when I got your background, bear with me just a second. Now, I'm not going to read all this to you because we'd have the whole show. newearthflow.co/Ocean Story Acts. That's a current website. We'll put it on the screen. But Alisha is Indian American. She has cultivated her passion for nature during her formative years in Africa safari lands and her family life in Canada, our neighbor to the north. I hope they still stay our neighbor. We don't need another state up there, I don't think. And you've been involved in biology and writing and decades of environmental conservation. And I was looking at your website, and I saw friends of mine here on Maui involved with you already. And I just really thought, what a great guest. How would you describe yourself? I mean, goes on so much. Canadian Climate Change Adaptation Planning Toolkit for Indigenous Communities, Inuit and Arctic waters, and clean water technologies in Lake Ontario, World Whale Festival, Northwestern Hawaiian Islands National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council, and on and on. How do you describe yourself?
Well, I just describe myself as a regular person that's connected with Mother Nature and Mother Ocean, the waters. You know, I think all of us, we have this inherent connection. We are nature. And I have been so blessed to, during the time that I was raised, my parents just really fostered that connection for me and my siblings. And we moved around a lot growing up, and everywhere we went, you know, we would be doing different types of activities out in nature for sure, and, you know, just in reciprocity, giving back. So we would be composting before composting ever became cool in North America, you know. I remember we didn't use things like paper towels. We had our daily napkins that we would save for our meals and use up. And then just other things like seeing the wonders of nature and having all sorts of adventures. One of the places I got to grow up was in Africa. So we had a lot of beautiful adventures out there that really fostered the connection not only with, you know, the land and the waters, but also the wildlife. So.
Wow. So your young life was an adventure, and all that you're doing now is kind of coming out of, just like you say, a family life that really honored the land and things in nature. What kind of work did your parents do, or your father do, or mother?
Yeah.
Related? Or no?
At the time, my parents were both teachers. My dad, a professor of analytical chemistry and environmental science, and my mom, a grade school teacher. And so
you were
they
at
did a
books
lot
and
of awesome.
Really, and getting you all in. See that when you have a show and you have to use your phone in the middle of it, you get interrupted sometimes. But that's okay. It just means we're popular, but they don't know we're on the air right now. Who are these guys?
It's okay.
So you were really stimulated right from the get-go. And you studied, and how did you been doing environmental work independently, or how you been doing it?
Yeah, talking about some of that right from the get-go, I was, some of my first memories, I remember planting a lemon tree in one of our backyards and the feeling of moss under my fingertips and being by the waters and the river. So all of that, just seeing the beauty of that at one point in my life starting to degrade and hearing about things like acid rain, and seeing the changes on a more minimal level when I was, kind of below my teens, but then more and more seeing things like the human impact and pollution, trash in the waters, garbage, all of that. So I would do a lot of cleanups, and I loved to blend the arts and music with environmentalism to really make it conducive to the greater public and my friends and the neighborhood and the community, as having like a softer touch point for people to get into these activities of environmentalism, to make it fun and beautiful, and to co-create in beauty, to be able to maintain the beauty of nature. So that essentially was, for a long time, I led a group called the Muse, and there was a collective of environmentalists and artists and musicians, and we would put together these awesome events on all the different types of artistic levels, and bring in funding for environmental projects or do cleanups in the community.
Was this Canada or Africa?
So this was where I was growing up in Toronto after Africa.
I see.
And yeah.
Wow.
And in Africa as well, I definitely, got to do some of those artistic environmental projects, but not as much on the scale of like where I was just learning to connect with nature and enjoying and giving back and cultivating the things that we would grow in our backyard, and going to be out with the animals in the safari lands that my parents would take us, me and my siblings, like every weekend essentially. And I feel like at times I was talking to some of these animals, and I remember this one time, this Naya Naya Bulembe, so what is known as a crocodile over there, and in Swaziland at the time, that's, the language. Naya Naya Bulembe was staring at me from probably about 200 feet away by the river, and there was just like this string that was kind of showing the boundary of where you were supposed to step or not. And I was just like, okay, you stay over there and I'll stay over here, and we respect each other. And I think that's, during these awesome safari encounters with some of these wildlife and animals, it's just like growing that respect for nature really gave me all of that connection and inspiration to be able to do the work that I did later on in high school, bridging the different disciplines, the arts, the music, the culture, and the environmental sciences, and then in university as well, and in my career. So one of the first big jobs I had in my career as an environmentalist was up in the Arctic of Canada. And so I can talk a little bit about that as well if you like.
Sure.
I feel like I'm talking a lot here, but
no, that's why you're here.
Yeah.
I'm liking that you're comfortable. Please continue.
So up in the Arctic, it was about 24 years ago or so. And to me, well, I'll talk a little bit about it. So the work that I was doing there was supporting the Inuit of the high Arctic. I lived north of 60 degrees latitude. And so it was there was a base community that I was representing, and the Inuit had some land claims along with some of the First Nations groups there. And I was representing a number of, like, essentially through the Joint Secretariat. We would take in all of the information and bring in the consensus from the community and the Inuit and the sort of the different agencies and represent the Inuit against things like oil and gas mining and diamond mining, which was starting to become a burgeoning industry there. And so I would travel to the communities further north, and I was part of the Hunters and Trappers Committee there, and we were noticing things like the snow was starting to change. So there was a project called the Snow Change Project, which only recently last year has actually, even though I've not been a part of it for so long, last year it actually won the Goldman Prize, which is a huge prize for an environmentalist. And so the guy that founded that project had us looking at the texture of snow and the consistency of how the snowpack would change leading to socioeconomic decline and impact. Essentially, the hunters and trappers could not go out on the land the way that they used to and build their igloos for one and stay out for days on end to get, all of the things that they would hunt and trap, like the caribou, the muskox, or go out in the waters and get the seals and all of that. So that lent them to having to go out in skidoos, and there were just a lifestyle change was starting to happen for these people, and the elders were trying to maintain the lifestyle that was more aligned with nature. And in one of the trials that I was representing the Inuit, it was super sad because the Inuit said, we can't eat diamonds. And they were crying at the trial, at the stand. And it was like, well, what are we going to do? We're representing the community, and these are smaller communities, and the business and the money side of things and these huge corporations and companies were the ones that were able to make the sway in this whole trial scenario. So I used to drink pristine waters out of the lakes and the rivers there, up in a place called Ulukaktukmute, or Holman. And the population there, although it was only 500 people, so after this diamond mine was starting to come in, all the pollution and the drilling salts were not needed to be cleaned up. So it affected caribou migration, it affected their hunting of the caribou, it affected the cleanliness of the waters for drinking. So all of these things definitely had a socioeconomic domino effects all around. Yeah. Mm.
You get that? You see that when they say what happens when you do something, how it can become a large thing? It starts as a little pea. Well, that's a story that I think we all know now. In my lifetime, when I was a little guy, and I remember them talking about, hey, we're going to run into a population problem in the future. And there was a book that said, there were books like 1984, An Animal Farm. 84, that's already 40, 50 years ago already. What are we doing here? And then we look at all the Silent Spring by Rachel Carr, all these little openings for us to start getting awake about how important environment was. Well, we still had an environment to preserve. And it starts with that little thing. Who would, us here sitting in Maui, Hawaii, think that someone affecting a tribe in the Arctic would have a global impact, a socioeconomic impact? And the fact is, it does. I applaud you. How did that? So that was a losing battle. Is it still going on? They're still fighting, I'm sure.
They're still fighting. There was a lot of good work that we did up there through the Joint Secretariat and in the Circumpolar Arctic. So the reason I bring up that example of one of my first big jobs in my career was because, that was like 24, 23 years ago or so. And it really blows my mind because we were talking about climate change, and it was known back then. Like I was talking about how the snow texture was changing, all of these different, to me, climate change encompasses the socioeconomic impacts as well. And so all of that was happening back then, and it took so long for North America to start bringing in that idea that climate change is a thing and that human impact is what's creating and accelerating all of this change. And so that's kind of like a small communities that were affected, but it's very similar, small remote communities. And here we are on the Hawaiian Islands, small remote communities that are being affected by human impact from other places in the world. I remember even telling people across Canada in the Canadian North because the Inuit live all across Canada as well in the North. And so I got to work with them all the way over to Ottawa and the East Coast side, closer to the East Coast side anyways. And so the thing was that we would tell women that were pregnant not to be eating fish at that time. Wow. And now you can only imagine how many more toxins and even plastics and all of that kind of thing are in the fish right now. So it's like, why has it taken us that long? And it's like been a long-standing fight, and a lot of conservationists and environmentalists know this. And there's people like Jean-Michel Cousteau and Jane Goodall and all these amazing elder conservationists that they say we don't give up. We don't give up. And it's still, I remember being in this room with my family and listening to Dr. David Suzuki, who I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's an amazing Canadian environmentalist. And he was saying that was actually 30 years ago at that time, and I was still pretty young and listening to this lecture, and there was only about 50 of us in the room. So he wasn't as well known, but he has like this broadcast channel and all this work and a foundation that he's, you can look him up at some point. But he was telling us that long ago, we really only have this last drop of water. If we consider our home, if we liken it to a test tube and there's water in a test tube, we're at that last drop of water that we can fill with our impact and until we have to start. And we've been at that last drop of water for a while, and we have been making progress in microcosms here and there, but then, not making as much progress. And so now I think we're coming to the Hawaiian Islands, and you asked me about that. And the way that I see it now with the political climate is that we've got to look at ourselves as individuals and look at our connection with nature and our connection with the waters and the land, and really see what we can do as leaders rather than looking up to other leaders and how they can make change. And there's a burgeoning momentum for like this movement where individuals are banding with community and making a change in their own lifestyles, working with each other in bringing Indigenous knowledge back and bringing the slower ways of being in nature and being aligned with nature back. Maybe even things like reducing fossil fuel use through not using your car for a couple of days or planning your trips. But thinking about all these things that we can incorporate into our lifestyles and then really start to build from those smaller microcosms and bridge with other microcosms of change to really expand. This is essentially our last generation that we have to really create a bigger impact. Because even if we stop doing everything that we ought to stop doing right now, all of that impact still needs to be taken care of. And so there's things that we need to do to clean up and to absorb the carbon. And here on the islands, we're surrounded by the ocean. And that's where I started working more with the waters and the ocean. It's like realizing the ocean is really absorbing a lot of the impact. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the climate change happening in the world, because the ocean is what covers most of our planet.
And gets so much of our toxic, whatever we are doing, it goes into the ocean, I know. You know, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of my own mission statement of my organization: art, music, culture, environment. You guys remember that, right? Well, you know, our name was Maui Arts and Music Association. People wondered, why are you combining art and music and environment and tourism? Because I see it all together. If we look at all the pieces, it all works perfectly. So just like you said about creating an example, and then like beacons of light around the world, we turn on our switch, and hopefully more and more people will see and embrace it in their own lives and in their own communities. And I want to say it, we save ourselves. It takes that. It takes personal commitment. I can appreciate when you were a little kid, it must have been really funny to see the whole world not operating this way. I know that you were aware at such a young age. You have such a full career, and hopefully ahead of you. I'm old. I'm thinking, this is somebody that could fill a role to run an organization that sees that it all fits together. You have a lot of people in the world you've seen like you. Do they have any influence? What are you seeing out there in the world? I'm meaning that in that you've probably been to many different conferences in all kinds of countries and all kinds of people, and you recognize that the United States has been sitting on its all this time and really thinking their economics is independent from environmental stuff. And now with our current presidency and the way they've been making actions that have been, you talked about things that you were doing research in the field that I don't know who funded you, but I imagine much of it, or some of it surely, was the government and granting organizations through universities. And now we're here in the United States, we're being suddenly shocked with monies not being available to continue research to support the truth of what's happening about our environment at a time when it couldn't be more important for people to hear and know about it.
Yeah, so that's where, us coming together and looking at these alternative funding sources and seeing, I love what you're talking about with your idea for your organization to bring in. It's very similar to the platform that I have right now, Ocean Story Acts. Bringing in the ACT stands for arts, culture, traditional ecological knowledge, and science, tech. So we're bringing in all the disciplines, we're bringing in everybody. It doesn't matter who you are and what your passions are. There's things you can do out of your passions that are going to be able to support this conservation, restoration, regenerative movement for Mother Nature and the waters and the land. And that's what I was so happy to connect with you and realize that you have a very similar thought pattern where, we're doing things from an enjoyable mode. We're bringing in all the disciplines, and, I have had the pleasure of leading and curating festivals with the arts and music, and also bringing in the science speakers and making it fun for everybody. So I think there's that, but also looking to our private investors and seeing, where they can help us make a change. Some of them don't know what to do with the money that they have to make a change and make an impact, and they're looking to do something good in the world and give back. And that's something that we can definitely call on our friends who are more financially wealthy and see where they can also come in and learn on some of these projects and enjoy as well and change their lifestyles and be some of the champions and superstars. So I think all of us coming together, bringing the different platforms together, having the conversations, and collaborating, and also really looking at the way that things used to be when they were more aligned with nature. Because I was talking with you a few days ago over the phone, and I think I'd mentioned that a really big part of it, at least for me, that's always been, because I've been able to be lucky enough to work with Indigenous peoples. And I guess essentially I've been seeing how inherently connected they are with nature, to the point where there's such a knowing of, what are the practices that we need to do to make a change? How do we go about doing that? And even when I was up in the Arctic, bringing the scientists together with some of these Indigenous elders and creating these conferences where we would have the conversations and then go out and take the action, where we would blend the old with the new. And essentially the reason for that is because we are nature, and for us to connect back in and align better with nature, we need to look at the ways and the practices that we used to have that aligned better with nature. Not to say that science and tech aren't going to be helping us with some of these projects and issues.
Like I was saying, it takes the best of the old traditional knowledge and the new and come out with something even greater. We're not enemies, we just haven't found out how we best work together, because no one wins if we don't solve some of these problems. And if we were down to the last speck of water decades ago, we have to be on part of a speck now, because things are accelerating in such a way that that deadline, you've heard it, I'm sure, we're at 30 seconds or 10 seconds to go before the clock strikes 12 on the whole planet, changing our civilization into one of the past civilization. We are. I don't have to tell you. I don't have to tell you. That's why you guys are tuning into the show, huh? As I'm listening, it invigorates me to know that you're right on. I mean, you sound like you're talking my language, to the point where I'm hoping that our audience recognizes how available nature is. We here on Maui, we are so blessed here on Maui. But I've been here, I'm 74. 37 years ago when I moved here, and local people said to me, "Oh, you should have seen Maui before it was spoiled." I didn't really understand that. I sure understand it now. And I've been working here a long time to try to bring it to the light. I'm so glad the other organizations. See, what I'm hoping to do is spotlight other organizations doing things under this big banner, like a branding, Mama and Papa. Papa was Participatory Action Patrons of the Arts when we were Maui Arts and Music Association. But now we've used our name, the Dreammakers Foundation, because it's Mama and Papa. Except now we say people aligned in positive action. Mama and Papa promote art, music, and culture, educate people about environmental solutions, be an example here in paradise, let's regain it, elevate the Hawaiian culture, both its traditional ways and things that work, along with new things. I don't know, have you ever heard of a guy named Michael Smith in the Earth Power Lodge up in Montana?
I have not, unless this is the Michael that built the Earth ships.
Well, no, that's not. But
okay.
This Michael, there's a movie called The Need to Grow. And he was taking, and still is, blue-green algae and processing it and creating a biofuel. They put into a jet engine. They take green waste and create biochar. And as they're heating it up inside their process without oxygen, they're siphoning off phytoceuticals to now where they grow. I would call it like Jurassic Park. Super grow. There was a test done here on Maui. In 3 months, 3,000% increase in the microbiome in the soil. So all the things, when you ask Michael, what's the most important? You create power. Most important is putting carbon back into the earth. We have to get the carbon back into the earth. All these things tie together so well. So when you think about what you want to do with all the money, we can tell all the people that have a lot of money what kind of things that will be socio and economically coming into being in this world. And I just have nothing but praise for all that you're doing. I mean, your level, I can see it even as you're sharing, your level of commitment. Have you done projects here locally? I know you have.
Yes, so
Give the people here some idea already.
yeah, so I have been here only about 3.5 years, and I've had the chance to do some things that are not as well. Some of them have been tangible in the ground implementation work for the waters, and some of them have been more communicative and just educational. And one of the things that I did when I first came here, I was working on a very small contract, and what I wanted to do something of my own, and I approached an elder and asked if I could do these holistic beach cleanups. So I was running those on the North Shore beaches once a week when I first started, and then it got to being about once a month. And so I would gather the community and gather them in circle for a bit of a science conservation talk, have guest musicians, including myself being a musician at times for the circle. We would have a potluck at the end. We would have always like a body practice like yoga or qigong. And so there were amazing people in the community that supported this voluntarily, and we would go out and clean up some of the beaches as well. But it was a whole holistic sort of practice where we're looking at our lifestyle and all of the different facets, and encouraging and inspiring people with, you know, those different modalities, the music, the arts, and looking at their own eating practices and lifestyle change and healing practices for their body. So there was that. I've had the chance to work on some contracts where I got to help with restoration of the wetlands, and so we're planting wetland plants like a kuli and just creating the flow of waters in Kihei that is more aligned with the way that it's supposed to be, because there's a lot of development there. And so when it rains, it would flood and the sedimentation would go out to the coral. So, you know, really taking care of those lands before the waters would travel out further to the ocean. And having these different types of plants growing would also absorb and filter and clean the waters before they go out to the ocean. As I mentioned, I got to work on a couple of festivals here. One of them is the World Whale Film Festival that I co-directed. There's an online platform as well as an in-person. It's due to funding, it's not happening these days, but I have some plans to start a different type of festival through Ocean Story Acts, and essentially working with elders. So last year, some amazing initiatives I got to be part of. I co-created these campaigns, and one of them was a campaign of my own. So essentially, we were trying to get the Stop Deep Sea Mining law passed for Hawaii waters. And I essentially rallied hard for that, and campaigning along with other organizations on the continent, as well as a little bit globally with elders here on the islands and the community, and really getting people to put forth the testimony that was needed. And, you know, there's a lot that can happen through rallying and petitioning and testimonies as well. So bringing the community together online to get that bill passed and then the law passed. And so That happened near the end of last year, and that was
Thank you.
wonderful. And then as well, actually with one of your friends, Kahu Alalani, I've done a few projects with her, and one of them was having her be the face of my campaign to help designate Papahanaumokuakea, our northwestern Hawaiian Islands, as a sanctuary. And so essentially at the time it was just a national marine monument. And so I created a short film with her and, wrote the script and all of that and put it out there and had people across the continent as well provide their comments and testimony. And, obviously there were other campaigns running simultaneously, but I did my part. And I got a little bit rewarded because now I'm on the advisory council for the Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Sanctuary. So it got formally designated in March of this year, which we were holding our breath and we were so happy and relieved because unfortunately, there's been some executive orders in the last couple of weeks even. One actually looking at commercial fishing on some of the national marine monuments. So one of them is the Pacific Remote Islands National Marine Monument because it's a lower designation. So there's, all sorts of conservationists standing up through, we're starting with our petitions all over again. And so we don't want that to happen in these pristine areas. And then
That to me is so outrageous.
Yeah.
Just hearing that.
Yeah.
That should make every one of you stand on your hind legs.
And then one of the things that unfortunately happened was an executive order to look at deep sea mining, even not only in our national waters in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, but as well international waters. So we'll see how all of these politics pan out. But, it's a little bit like daunting, but at the same time, there's a lot of us that are not giving up.
I was going to say, what choice do we have?
Yeah.
Right? We don't want that, so we have to fight.
Yeah.
That's outrageous, though. I mean, it's just all been recently, this wave of activity that you really I guess more people than voted for our current president now, and many of them who voted for him are recognizing these steps are so outrageous. I bet if we had election today, we'd have some kind of different outcome, but here we are. How do you undo what's already been done? I'm not sure. When you stop a flow of science and knowledge and sharing and support, and now you want to kind of replace it, I don't know what it's going to do. But I'm glad there are leaders like yourself who are very approachable and you're very knowledgeable and obviously have had some success, and in whatever little way we can help or a big way we can help, we want to help. So that's really important. Here on Maui, when I think about our future on Maui, water, I'm just going to throw it out. Have you checked out the harbor water in Lahaina and have any kind of report on what's going on the west? I guess it could be everywhere, because we were talking about coral problems in '89 and I got here in '88. We're still talking about the same stuff. It's just unbelievable. What's going on now after the fire with the water in the west side?
Yeah, so it's been deemed, clean enough to enter and have our recreational activities. There's been some interesting situations that have occurred with vessels like marine vessels like boats that have actually disturbed Honolulu Bay corals, unfortunately. And so there's been an issue even again at Honolulu Bay with the human waste when the porta potties were taken out. So there's all sorts of different types of issues. There's runoff that is still going into the waters from Ukamahame. I was working with an elder there, and we were actually literally moving the rocks to change the flow of water and to try and help that situation. So some of the colder stream water can come through to also help the growth of the seaweed, and that will also reciprocate and help the health of the corals.
Have you seen any kind of impact from the temporary storage of the toxic soil from Lahaina? Anything there?
Not yet. No, I think that they've closed that up pretty tight. And so in terms of the toxic soil, initially, yes, there was, because water flows, and it took them a long time. And so the EPA was there. There was beautiful protocol that happened every morning and evening, that they would stand in circle with the elders and take care of the top layer. But in terms of putting that away now, it's not, blowing around or flowing into the waters now. But it was obviously when...
I remember when it was up pretty high and they had a 3-inch rainfall and everyone was concerned about overflow. But no more. It's been taken. It's under control now.
It's under control at the moment, and I had not gone into the waters, even living on the North Shore, for a long time, because I know that everything flows in the waters. And even when I did, months and months after, and so much I wanted to go into the ocean, but I would see some of the debris, like we would see the debris over on the other Maui Nui Islands as well. So yeah, definitely there's been an impact. And looking even to the fires that had happened in Los Angeles, there's an impact, and I saw photos of the sedimentation. That's even a few days ago, I was checking that out, and it's still occurring. And unfortunately, Southern California has another issue happening where there's an algae bloom that's affecting the marine life. The seals and the cetaceans, the dolphins are washing up on shore. And so that's a little bit separate than the fire toxicity, but there's still toxicity. And so, all of these different cycles of pollution will feed each other and create issues. So,
do we not hear about Fukushima because it's been stopped, or because they just stopped talking about it?
So I actually was working on a campaign for helping to stop the release of the Fukushima stored waters a couple years ago. And I worked with a group up in San Francisco, and we had done a bit of a rallying and campaigning for that through artivism. And unfortunately, there was a company that decided to release the waters that they had been storing with the radioactive material in those waters into the greater ocean. And so, I think scientists kind of look at the issues and try and triage what is the bigger one happening at this moment. So in their minds, there were certain levels of radioactive material that are allowable, and so that's kind of not being talked about because they're
change the rules.
They're
what's
not allowable. Yeah,
is that what's happening? Sort of like the smog problem. I got to LA in 1973. When you were a gleam in someone's eye. And they were saying, well, we've been given a 2-year reprieve to clean up the air in Los Angeles. Push it back, push it back, push it back. Same here, because I can't imagine that any can of anything from the ocean isn't radioactive. And we don't seem to, we keep changing all the what is safe by what fits into our economic model, maybe? I mean, I don't like to say that, but I'm afraid I feel that.
Well, the economic model speaks volumes, unfortunately, and so we're still entrenched in this capitalistic society, and it's a huge part of our civilization is the way we measure and value the world for the most part. And, it is unfortunate, but that mentality is starting to shift as we bring Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous science to the forefront and amplify the voices of our elders. We're starting to see where capitalism is not serving us as a system as much anymore, and the economic models are starting to shift again in microcosms in different places. But we've definitely got to have a lot greater push for these regenerative, naturally aligned models that serve us in the way we were meant to be as humans and serve our greater humanity.
Well, I hope to be, with your help, a lot of help, doing it here. I mean, people from all over the world coming to Maui. Now we could use a shot in the arm economically, but we also, we need to be self-sustainable and more forever. So that's why I like to do it all, and right from here. So you're here only a couple of years. I hope you'll stay another 50, I hope.
Thank you.
And because I can see that you're the kind of leader, your delivery is very, very available. I want to say bioavailable. You're very available, and what you say is clearly understood in such simple, not simplistic, but simple terms that you kind of can't miss. Have you had some good response here recently from the private? I always wonder. The private money's here. When we go private here, we can go to, oh gosh, Larry Page, the guys that own Google and Amazon guy, and now we can tell them it's in their neighborhood, right?
Yeah. And honestly, some of these bigger corporations here on Maui are also looking to change their optics. And we've had this term corporate sustainable responsibility, CSR. It's been thrown around for a long time. And so, it looks good on these companies to set aside a portion of their funds towards giving back to the environmental causes. And definitely here on Maui, some of those corporations include the resorts and, even smaller ones like restaurants. And so there's been some good response for sure. There's been some amazing organizations that have been working to create programs at the resorts as well. And, the Ritz-Carlton is also one of those that's, a bigger resort, but it's always had the Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ocean Futures Society and Ocean Ambassadors. And so what I'm kind of bringing us around to the topic of is regenerative tourism. So when I was out recently with the Sea Grant program, and they have been doing dune restoration in places at beaches across the island, there were tourists that had come through at one of these events, and they were from, most of them were from Europe. They had come through and they were like, yeah, our company actually pays us as part of our job perks. They pay us 3 days out of our vacation to go and mandatorily have to do some sort of a restoration project, be it a beach cleanup or a dune restoration. And so regenerative tourism has picked up a lot in the world as a new type of commercial sort of social impact, social enterprise type of a business. And I think that that's something that we can draw upon for some of these tourists that come, thinking about how you can give back. And we encourage the tourists to come. Like, obviously tourism is part of our economy, and that's been a bit slower since not only the pandemic, but the fires. But if the tourists are coming through and learning about the Indigenous science and the wisdom, and as well giving back through these restoration and regenerative events, then, they can take some of that knowledge back to where they are and start up their own cleanups. And so I think it's a beautiful cycle, and it's part of a way of getting us into a circular economy way of thinking. And
you think like me. I'm telling you, it feels like, okay, I can retire someday. There's new breath in this movement. It isn't parked. There are people around like you. Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
Very, very, very. I know that sounds like a funny thing to say, but you really said it here. You're talking about the same kind of stuff, but maybe you can get through to these doors here. Maybe they think I was a little political. When I was green, you don't know, but in 1994, I ran for mayor of Maui against a couple of people that people around here know for a long time. And then I switched to council, all kinds of stuff. But they thought I was radical. I was just talking the same kind of language we're talking now. And I was pigeonholed by, it just is hard to believe, because 30 years later, there's a statue. I'd booked this Maui Arts and Cultural Center's opening New Year's Eve and New Year's Day to do a global awareness of this new organization called the Maui Arts and Music Association. Art, music, energy, environment, tourism, just like we were talking here. But I got marginalized by politics. But it isn't too late. And not only isn't too late, we are now, God's help, just in time. Before we were ahead of our time. Now the message is you can hardly take a breath without noticing that something could be better. And I'm glad to know, I'd like to see more young people visibly involved. And I don't know how to describe young people. If you're 50 out there, you're young people to me. I want to see people involved where it isn't a matter of we need to change our habits. Like here, I always felt like the Hawaiian culture always had this very rooted, basic love and respect of the land, that if we just would embrace that from the Hawaiian culture and move it in, integrated. We talk about it, but hasn't really happened. So I'm just so thankful that you're still here and breathing. When I'm long gone, and I'm not going so quick, by the way, when I'm long gone, it's nice to know there are leaders like you.
Thank you. And yes, the Ahupua'a system is an ingenious system, and it's known as looking at things from a watershed perspective, as opposed to a politically or geographic line that we're placing between towns, where the water flows from mountain to ocean, and all of the biosystems within and the cultural systems within are respected. And I'm sure the listeners know all about, the taro patches and the fish ponds and, the food sovereignty, not only the food sovereignty, but the way of utilizing the materials within each ahupua'a for the Native Hawaiians had been and still has been in some places, to utilize those materials for clothing and all of the necessities of life. And right now on Maui, we've got a food sovereignty issue where 90% of our food is being imported, and even the food that the fish that we depend on is being actually imported, because there's been like a hoarding of the fish and a decline in our fish populations. And I didn't even get into talking too much about what happens all in the ocean there, but so all of these things are looking at being changed and bringing in more of the co-governance, if that's possible, and these ahupua'a system-like thinking and practices in the ground would really help us and help us to buy into, to live into that circular economy that I'm talking about, that really would serve us as humanity. And I believe that Maui and the Hawaiian Islands and, using these models can actually become a model for small island states and coastal communities and the greater global communities. And so...
You may not realize it, but we are only 2 minutes away from the end of the show.
Okay.
I hope you'll come back. I hope that
you.
you will share more. This has been a really, really nice hour for me. I hope it's been good for you. In our last minute and a half, what do you know you really want to make sure you don't forget to say?
Well, if you'd like to get in touch with me or look at some of the work that I'm doing, my website is newearthflow.co/oceansstoryacts, ACTS. And you can also, if you like Instagram, follow me at Ocean Story Acts. One of the things I would love to remind us that we are so connected with, we're inherently connected with nature and the waters and the land, and just remind us that, you know, most of the oxygen that we breathe in our lifetimes, no matter where we live, on the continent, landlocked, comes from the ocean and comes from the systems, the biosystems of the ocean. So in every breath that you take and in every drop of water that you drink, not every time, but I would take some time every now and again to be grateful for those systems of Mother Nature that provide us everything we are and that keep us alive, our life support system.
Isn't that perfect? Because we are at the end of the show. Alisha Shanti Chauhan, thank you for being here. I hope you'll come again. You've been a terrific guest. And you've been a terrific audience. And we're going to let you go right now. And we'll see you next week. Have a good week, everyone.